Okay, B'ezrat Hashem, today, in Masechet Shabbat, we're starting towards the bottom of Lamed Chet Amud Bet. B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to have today, Yochai, now we can start. We're going to have today, Yochai, אני צריך להגיד לך משהו. אני חשבתי על My wife told me, this is not, I don't know why I have this on record, but I just wanted to tell you. My wife told me she saw somebody that when she looked at her, it made her smile. ואני חשבתי על יוחאי. There's some, a lot of, I read a statistic once that said that as we get, the younger we are, the more we smile. You understand how sad this is? Listen to this. The little babies, you see little babies? They're always smiling. Because everything's interesting to them. Everything's exciting to them. The older we get, the more, unfortunately, the more boring and the less things are less interesting to us. But be'etzim, it's wrong. We have to be b'simcha all the time. We understand what we get in this world, Hashem takes care of us. But it's natural. It's a statistic. It shows the older you get, the less often you smile. I forget the numbers, but babies smile like thousands of times a day. You can see that. And adults, it's like way down. And it's so sad when you think about that. But that's not how it should be.
But I have to give the
it doesn't mean you should be ridiculous.
It
doesn't mean you should be ridiculous. It means you should live with Hashem.
Smile.
But it's an amazing thing like that. Anyways, let's go. Let's get started. You give credit to your mother, huh? Your mother.
My mother,
some people you find. It's very important.
Very happy person. And she knows to appreciate everything. She take a little plate, and she make it. It's simchat chaim.
It's a very important thing.
Very important things.
Okay. Kitzu. We're learning today. We're beginning Lamed Chet Amud Bet, Lamed Chet Amud Aleph. Towards the bottom of the page. We're going to have 4 sections today. What we're learning today is so practical in halacha. I think we're going to have to do this on Monday because it's so nogeya. So first, we're going to do a resolution to a stira, R Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. We'll get to that. B'ezrat Hashem, what you're allowed to do, shihiyah, what you're allowed to benefit from. We left off yesterday. That's probably going to be the more complicated part of today. The second thing we're going to do, B'ezrat Hashem, is we're going to speak about a person put the food on the oven b'kavana, means b'mezid, but he took it off, as we'll see, before it was mitzdamek v'yafelo. It's a very interesting question. We're going to get to this also, we'll see. Then we're going to move on, which is extremely nogea. This
Shabbat, he took it off.
Right, like Friday night, he decided, okay, I'll take it off. The third thing we're going to discuss is chazara in the tanaim that are necessary in order to do chazara. We always do this. Keep your hand on it, your kavanah. This is probably one of the more nogea sugyot that we're actually doing. We're not going to go through the halachot today, but we should definitely do that one day. And the final thing we're going to get into is there's different types of ovens. There's something called a tanur, and there's something called a kupach, which we'll get into. There's differences in halakha than a kirayim or a kira that we've been discussing until now. So B'ezrat Hashem, let's see. We're going to begin here. It's towards the bottom of Lamed Chet Amud Aleph. Kashya Rabbi Meir ad Rabbi Meir. Kashya Rabbi Yehuda ad Rabbi Yehuda. This is where we left off yesterday. Okay, we have to look at the board a little bit before we see this inside. What we're going to show here is, if you remember yesterday we had a braita, and 3 days ago, we also had another braita where we quoted Shitot of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir.
Yes.
It's amazing actually, because yesterday was the yortzeit of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Lai. And there's a stira between their words. So let's write out the stira and then we'll show the answer. So 2 days ago, let's start with yesterday. This is really braita number 2. Braita number 2, we said in a scenario where you did shihiyah, but Shogeg the mezid, right? As we brought in the braita yesterday. But what was the machloket Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda in the braita? If you want to look at it, it's kedai to see it inside.
It wasn't yesterday. Was yesterday?
Yeah. We went through it briefly because it wasn't. I didn't want to focus on it. But if you look at the braita says like this. Look at the braita. It says meiteve. You see that braita? Meiteve. First one line is meiteve. The first one line. Meiteve. You see, it's about 8 lines down. שכח תירא גבי קירה ובשלה בשבת, בשוגג יאכל, מזיל לא יאכל. במה דברים אמורים? בחמין שלא חמו כל צורכן, ותבשיר שלא בישל כל צורכו, אבל בחמין שהוא חמו כל צורכן, v'tavshil shebishel kol tzorko, ben b'shogeg, ben b'mezid yochal divrei Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir says like this. If you put food on the fire, we're talking about there wasn't gufa uktuma. That's what we're talking about. No gufa uktuma. He says whether it's chamin or tavshil, means hot water or hot food, whatever it is. What's the halacha in both cases? Chamin, tavshil.
שלא בושלו כל צורכן.
Ben b'mezid, ben b'shogeg. No, but we're talking about where it is. Kol tzorkan, what's the halacha?
Yochal.
Yochal. Mutar. Right? You saw what he said. Ben b'shogeg, ben mezid, yochal. Yochal. You see? Mutar. Let's just write mutar.
Sounds like the Beraita before it was
But why it's start different? מתי ושכח גדרה על גבי גדרה ובשלה.
That's why it's not called tzorkan. But where it is called tzorkan, we said is chamin v'tavshil. Rabbi Meir says mutar. Comes Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda omer chamin shehu chamur kol tzorkan mutarin mipnei shemitztamek v'ra lo. Aval tavshil shebishel kol tzorko asur mipnei shemitztamek v'yafeh lo. So Rabbi Yehuda argued. And what did Rabbi Yehuda say? He said rak chamin, the hot water would be mutar, because we know as hot water which is fully heated, it's considered mitztamek veralo.
מצטמק ורעלו טוב, מותר.
Because it dissipates. I'll explain it in a minute. No, forget about the kasha. Meaning, just I want to get the shita, because that's really what's nogia to the next step. I don't want to go back to that step. The point, exactly. The point in machloket was like this: is that according to Rabbi Meir, if you put whether it was water or food, shehiyah that you were not supposed to do, it was kol tzoko. It's kol tzoko. You put it on the fire. You're allowed to eat it after the fact. Let's say no gufa uktuma. That's why you weren't supposed to do it necessarily. Okay. But it's mutar. Okay? Rabbi Yehuda said only with water, but not with tavshil, because tavshil is mitzdamek v'yafelo. So therefore, if it was tavshil actually, even though it was fully cooked, you're not allowed to eat that on Shabbat. Yochai, Vanta? Clear? Okay. Problem is, 3 days ago, we had a machloket in a Braita, which we'll call Braita 1, where the machloket seems to be very different. If you remember, this was Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. We had like this. We had Rabbi Meir's opinion in Beit Hillel. If you remember, we said, well, let's just focus in on Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, there were different versions of the machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. This might ring a bell, if you remember, with Shehiyah and with chazara. Rabbi Meir's opinion there was, and I'll read it to you, I'm not making this up. Rabbi Meir said like this: Ve'en mashin al she'ena gufa ve'ena ktuma, u'mahen mashin, Beit Shammai omrim velo klum, u'Beit Hillel omrim chamin avalot tavshil. So here Rabbi Meir said, rak chamin, because we're following Beit Hillel. And it has to be gufa ktuma l'chaora. But the point is, rak chamin, that the only thing you'd be allowed to put for shehiyah is hot water. So it's a stira. Just 1 second. And Rabbi Yehuda, good, excellent, Matan, beautiful. But let's see. Let's just see the stira and then we'll get to the answer. You're right, you're on track for sure. But here Rabbi Yehuda is the shita who said, Ben b'chamin, ben b'tavshil. Rabbi Yehuda's words were, exactly, Rabbi Yehuda said, Rabbi Yehuda omer, Beit Shammai omrim chamin avalot tavshil, Beit Hillel omrim chamin v'tavshil. Chamin v'tavshil. So it appears at face value, Matan's already on the answer, but it appears at face value that there's a stira here. In the first Braita, which is Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, Rabbi Meir said shehiyah would be permitted only for chamin, only hot water. And in the second Braita, he says chamin and tavshil would be mutar for shehiyah. In the first Braita, Rabbi Yehuda said chamin and tavshil will be mutar for shehiyah. And in the second, he says only chamin because tavshil is mitztamek v'yafelo, and that's a problem. So let's see. So the Gemara is going to speak out very much what Matan just said. What?
I was thinking.
Oh, you thought about that still?
Maybe following also the shita of
So
the answer is very straight. What Matan really just said, the answer. Let's see it inside. It says the Gemara, Kashid Rabbi Meir ad Rabbi Meir, Kashid Rabbi Yehuda ad Rabbi Yehuda. So there's a stira between the shitot. So the Gemara says like this: Rabbi Meir ad Rabbi Meir lo kashya halachatchila hadiavad. Rabbi Meir lechatchila is the first Braita. The first Braita, he says lechatchila, the only thing you should be putting on the stovetop, on the kira. By the way, there it's talking about where it's gufa ktuma, but the only thing you should be putting lechatchila is chamin, only hot water. Lechatchila. Now, diavad shachachta, like you said, the second Braita. His shita is, since it was mevushal kol tzoko, you could eat it after the fact. But the point is, L'chadchila was the first braita, only put hot water. But the avad, you could eat even tafshil that was put after the fact it's mutar. So that's not a stira, but l'chadchila versus b'diavad. Okay, easy. Rabbi Yehuda nami lo kashya, also not a kashya. Why? Kan, and you mentioned this also. Begufa uktuma. The first braita is talking about where you did gufa uktuma, like you were supposed to. So then says Rabbi Yehuda, even a tafshil should be mutar to do shehiyah, to put it on before Shabbat. Kan, the second braita, b'sheina gufa uktuma. It's where you had not done gufa uktuma. So then Rabbi Yehuda says, b'diavad, the only thing that you'd be allowed to enjoy is the water. But the tafshil would then be asur because you didn't do gufa uktuma like you were supposed to.
So it's two different ways, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said it's about gufa uktuma. Rabbi Meir, l'chadchila b'diavad. Rabbi Yehuda, it's about gufa uktuma
versus not gufa uktuma.
So it's not the same.
Yeah, it's a similar answer. I want to point out because l'chaora, you look at that braita, and it would appear that we're saying that braita is talking about where there is gufa uktuma. Just want to point that out.
Rabbi Yehuda,
for sure in Rabbi Yehuda, yeah.
You said that Chachamim follow Rabbi Yehuda shita.
In the words of even Rabbi Meir, it seems to be that there is gufa uktuma. But the point is that it would come out like this again. So
is it gufa uktuma? So why rak chamin?
What's that?
So why rak chamin? If gufa uktuma, אין בעיה.
So he's machmir. That's the point. Rabbi Meir was the machmir shita. Remember that first braita, Amud Zayin, he was the one who was more machmir.
Yeah.
He was more machmir.
We brought.
Let's
just recap once again.
Yeah.
We brought Chachamim, Hanania, Rabbi Meir, and then we said that Chachamim follow the shita of Rabbi Yehuda.
Explain the Mishnah like Rabbi Yehuda,
and Shia requires garuf וכתוב.
Exactly, yeah.
אז רגע, אז פה, garuf וכתוב. According to Bet Shammai, Shia.
I don't want to get so complicated right now, because really we don't have time to go through the whole sugya. Bezat Hashem will go over that when we go through that. But just bekitzu, let's just get bekitzu. What happens here is that we're saying is, Rabbi Meir, the chiluk between his two statements is l'chadchila and b'diavad. L'chadchila, he only allows you to put on for shehiyah chamin, hot water. B'diavad, if you put both, he would say it's permitted, again, as long as it was mefushal kol tzoko. Otherwise it wouldn't be allowed. Rabbi Yehuda, we're saying the chiluk is if there was gufa uktuma. Meaning in his first statement he was saying there was gufa uktuma, so then you could even put a tavshil. In the second statement he's saying if you didn't do gufa uktuma and you put tavshil, that's mitztamek ve'afelo, that's going to be asur to eat that after the fact.
So why it's happened that Rabbi Meir is more machmir?
Well, we had that in the first braita already, we said that he was more machmir, right? Really, you're right, it's true. Very
more lenient compared to this one.
That's true. Very interesting. You're right. Here he seems to be more lenient, and there he was more machmir. Yeah, very interesting the way it comes out. Yeah, I hear. That's a good point. All right, let's go ahead, Chavra. Let's continue. Ibailu. Now the Gemara asks a new section, new question. Now the Gemara here asks a question that seems to be doesn't make sense why it's asking based on what we've already learned. Let's read it inside, and I'll explain to you how the Ritva learns the question. Ibailu. The Gemara says like this. This is the question they asked. Avar v'shaha mai. What if he avar means he transgressed, means he did the wrong thing? He did avera, I mean he wasn't supposed to. And he did shehiyah. So mai. What's the halacha? Mi kansur rabanan or lo?
Like avar v'sha'a.
Means he went and did an avera. He did shehiyah like he was not supposed to. Mi kansur rabanan or lo?
Lo gufa v'lo ktuma.
So did they give him a knas or not? Now what's the question? So already Yochai is saying obviously it has to be without gufa uktuma, because if it was with gufa uktuma, so then there's no question. We know, like we said before, Rabbi Meir would say l'chadchila only chamin. Yehuda says you can use both. So what's the question over here? No, this is b'mezid. So the question is it's b'mezid. So what's the question? So comes the Ritva and he says like this. I'll tell you what the question is. Very interesting question. This guy didn't do gufa uktuma like he was supposed to. He put food on the stovetop that was mitztamek v'yafelo type food. He put cholent that was fully cooked on the stovetop before Shabbat. As it cooks, it gets better. It stews, even though it's fully cooked. But then, when Shabbat hit, he said, you know, I want to do tshuva. And he takes it off the fire.
How you know
and he takes it off the fire. That's what Ritva explains. Rishonim know. Baruch Hashem, we have Rishonim.
No, how we know that from the Gemara?
That's how he learns Pshat, because otherwise it's not the question doesn't even start. We know the answer in a regular case where you put it on. We already said. So he says there must be another factor here. What's the other factor? Is that he took it off on Shabbat before it got v'yafelo. Meaning it was a food that would have been mitztamek v'yafelo, but he took it off the fire before it became benefited on Shabbat.
How come? Because
so now there's a question.
Do we say
a penalty?
It starts already to be
that's the question. So the question is, do we say, look, you did something mitchila that Chazal don't allow, so therefore you shouldn't be allowed to eat it? This is like Rav Shita was told, mistamek v'yafelo is asu. Or do we say, no, we say that you took it off before tachlis it got any benefit. Memela, you should be allowed to eat it. Very interesting question we have over here.
So you really took it, but he said if you put it kol soko, it's already start to mitamik v'yafelo.
Oh, so that's the point. Let's say, I don't know, let's just make up a thing. Let's say it takes 10 minutes on Shabbat for it to get some benefit.
I got it.
So 5 minutes into Shabbat, you took it off. Now, you knew initially when you put it before Shabbat that it was mitamik v'yafelo and you shouldn't have done this. So then on Shabbat, you took it off after 5 minutes and it didn't have any benefit. So that's the shaila. Do the chachamim give him a knas and say you can't eat it anyways? Or do we say, look, it didn't have any benefits, so you should be allowed to eat it?
I think so, no knas.
You think no knas?
No knas.
No knas.
If you say it's kol zorko,
נראה לי לא קנס.
זה כל זורקו.
He make a tshuva, and he make it even before he start to benefit from that.
No, we said even שכחו, like the same idea of the שכחו בדיעבד, but בלכתחילה לא שכחו, it's גזרה, right? They were נקנסים. They gave them a knas.
בסוף.
Those people that like they שכחו. Okay, so the same thing here, the person does it in mezid, the fact that he, after doing the tshuva.
ודאי שאסור. ודאי שאסור. You're saying ודאי שאסור, and you're saying ודאי שמותר. So let's see what
לא ודאי, לא ודאי, אבל נראה...
It sounds to be like it's אסור.
הוא שם את זה על האש בשבת, מה?
לא, הוא שם את זה לפני שבת. לפני שבת, שלא גור וכתום.
הוא שם את זה על האש לפני שבת, והיה לו לעשות גופה וכתומה, ולא עשה את זה. וזה היה אוכל שמסתמק ויפה לו. אבל לפני שיפה לו, before it became benefited, he took it off the fire on Shabbat.
עושה תשובה.
So that's the question. Do they give him a knas?
ולא גרו וכתום.
It wasn't, that's the problem. So do they give him a knas and say, look, you did something asur from the beginning? Or we say, look, it didn't actually receive benefit. We're saying in the shitot to say again, in the shitot that say it's asur and it's mistanek v'yafelo.
אבל אם הוא אומר שעבר, זה אומר ששם משהו לא בסדר.
Exactly, that's
either to כל צורכו, או לפי רבי חנניה של בן דורסה, או עשה משהו לא בסדר.
אבל אומר לך, מגובשה כל צורכו?
Yeah, let's say it was. But it's mistanek v'yafelo, ויש דעות, רב ושמואל, למדנו אתמול, שהם סוברים שגם זה אסור.
אבל לפני שהתחיל מסמק ואפילו,
לא כרב יוחנן של המים. Yeah, let's see. So says the Gemara. What's the story here? Ivailo, the question is like this. So what if he transgresses and he puts it on the fire that's mistamek v'yafelo without gufa uktuma? Mi kansur abanan or lo? Did they give him a knas or not? Tashma. Amar Shmuel bar Natan Amar Bichanina Kisharach Rab Yossi letzipori. Remember Rab Yossi and Tzipori. Remember the story with Lag BaOmer. The whole story. Kol HaSipor. The Romim, they sent him to Tzipori. So that's why he talks about him in Tzipori. So when Rabbi Yossi went to Tzipori, Matzah chamin shenishtau al gabe kira. It was Shabbat, and he found there was hot water that had been left on the stove. Now apparently it was no gufa uktuma. There was this situation. There was hot water on the stove. Now we know hot water is mitztameg veralo. Okay. Velo asalan. So he didn't say it was asur. Means since it was mitztameg veralo, he said no problem. But beitzim mitzumakot shenishtau al gabe kira. He also found beitzim mitzumakot. Mitzumakot means shriveled. Eggs that were shriveled, it means as they cook, they shrink and shrink and shrink. And it gets better. That's mitztanek v'yafelo. And he found that it had been left on the kira before Shabbat without kufa uktuma. V'asalahan, and he said that it was asur. So says the Gemara, oh, my love lo ta Shabbat. Didn't it mean that he said you cannot eat it now? Why was he saying you can't eat it now? Doesn't it mean it was for that Shabbat? Meaning to say is, doesn't it mean that he prohibited, he said it's asur for you to eat this? Now why was he saying it's asur for you to eat this? No, this is not a question, it's a proof. L'chaora, what does it mean? He did asur it to them, but he said it's asur. So the Gemara says, what does it mean? It means that he made it asur for them to eat that Shabbat. Kanireh, if you put it on a mitztamek v'yafelo, if you did it intentionally, it's going to be asur to eat. So we answered our question.
But maybe here the action happened it's become better. The eggs. The eggs was fully cooked.
So we're assuming, excellent. We're assuming in the story it was taken off before it got better. Otherwise, this is not a proof. That's
how you can say it got better, not got better?
It did. No, it didn't get better. That's
how you make this?
Be a scientist. So the Gemara says. So the proof is again. Proof is that in this story it didn't get better, but they had put it and that's the story. No. So the Gemara says not a proof. Okay, not a proof. Yitzchak, what's the proof that we're bringing? Is that you see they put it on b'kavana initially before Shabbat, and he said it's asur because it was something that was mitztamek v'yafelo. Even if you took it off after, it's still going to be asur. He said it's asur to eat it. No. That's otherwise it's not. That you took off after 5 minutes. Exactly. That's what we have to say. Otherwise, so this is a proof. So this is a proof.
maybe רבי יוסי על עצמו החמיר, אבל לא
עשה להן.
עשה להן.
כן. So the Gemara says not a proof. Why is it not a proof? לא.
רגע, תן לו לחשוב.
Okay, so we have to know.
למה זה לא proof, מתן?
Well, you're not going to get the answer. Because when it says עשה להן, it doesn't mean that he said אסורים אתם לאכול את זה. That's not what it means. What it means is, he taught them the halacha, שאסור לעשות כן, so that the next Shabbat, they wouldn't do the same thing.
Because
that's
they
the
were
answer.
shogeg.
They didn't know the halacha.
Okay, but here we're speaking about different situation.
So therefore it's not an answer to our question.
It's exactly the same.
Exactly.
הם לא ידעו.
לא, הם עשו את זה בכוונה, שמו את זה, ושמו דבר שמצטמק ויפה לו, והורידו את זה באמצע שבת, לפני שנעשה מעשה, בדיוק כמו הצ'ולנט לפני זה. והוא אסר להם, היית אומר שזה, הנה, הגמור אומרת חינוך הוכחה, לא. הוא אמר לחבר'ה, זה אסור.
בצער, אבל איך אתה יכול לדעת?
אסור לעשות כן, ואל תעשו את זה בשבת הבאה.
איך דייקת מזה?
So the Gemara says, no, that's not the pshat. Meaning it's not a proof. Really, in terms of, this is mutar, you could eat this. Meaning, if you took it off before it got better, you betzem could eat it. So what does it mean? What does it mean, asar lahen? So the answer is the Shabbat haba'ah. What it means is he told them, look, my friends, you're not allowed to do this. So next Shabbat, don't put it before Shabbat without gufa uktuma. So therefore, you don't have a proof to our question. No proof. Now the Gemara on a tangent just tells us, in terms of beitzim, eggs, we just said. Beitzim that are mitzumakot,
wives get tried.
Mitzumakot, these shriveled eggs, it makes it better as it eats. After it's fully cooked, it gets better. That's what the Gemara says. How do we? So where the Gemara says, where do we see?
So לוקח ביצה מהחמין. איך היא מצטמקת ויפה, חומה, וחותכים אותה לחצי עם הפלפל שחור.
What do you call it?
ביצה חומה.
No, is there a word that you use or no?
ביצים לא.
My mother used to do that.
אשכנז אומרים באה.
That's true. But no, I'm not saying that. That's bichlal, but in the cholent specifically.
No,
there's no special. Yeah, my mother used to do it. It's very good. So the Gemara says like this.
Very Saudi stuff.
My mother did it. We do it also at home sometimes. It's very nice.
Very nice.
It gets brown.
It's usually very brown.
Very
but
nice.
You know how you make it better? You boil the egg before. And then you put it, and then you dip it inside, so you're getting the white. This is a proof, by the way, shebetzah bolat. If you're eating betzah from the children, that's a proof. Because the betzah is not סגורה 100%. יש לנו קרבים קטנים. How come the should become brown?
I hear.
זה הפרוף שזה ביצה להתבשרית, אם לא ביצה. את הבשרי. ביצה של צ'ולן.
It's good to use for egg salad too. It's very nice.
That's
the eggs, those eggs. Very good. Anyways, okay, back to the another time of food. So the Gemara says, this implies that when you talk about these eggs that are shriveled, the more it cooks, it gets better. So the Gemara says, yeah, that is true. Said, one time, I and Rebbe went to a certain place, and this was Bachol, this was during the week. We were guests somewhere. And they brought eggs in front of us that were so shriveled like ozradin. Ozradin, it's called crab apples or sorb apples. They're small apples. The point is that they brought these eggs that were shriveled that were very small. It means it had cooked and cooked and cooked to such a degree that it got very small. We ate a lot of them. So the Gemara says, so this is a proof that it tastes very good. Haraya mitzdamakot v'yafela, and as these eggs cook and they get smaller and smaller, it's a proof that it actually gets better. That's the point.
What's the right? We know,
because
we say already that being mitzvah.
Well, that we're saying, we're showing from a story. You see that it's mitzdamakot v'yafela. Yalla, let's go weiter, Chaver. Now we have of the new sugya about chazara. This is very interesting.
רגע, מה
הפשט?
What? מה הפשט?
שלא כנסו.
What?
לא
We didn't answer the question. No, we didn't. לא פשטנו השאלה.
אבל הנה, הוא לא
We
כנס
didn't answer
אותם.
the question. We didn't answer. The Gemara leaves off without an answer. Sometimes that happens. We leave off without an answer. You have to look it up and
רבי יוסי לא אסר להם את זה.
He didn't answer. He didn't
אז
say.
נראה שזה לא כנסו.
We don't know. We don't know. Meaning, he didn't say clearly that it's mutar. We're just saying
הוא
you
ייתן
don't.
להם את זה לאכול בשבת.
The point is, you could
אבל זה
learn.
היה בטעות, בשוגג, הם לא ידעו אפילו.
רבנו,
תעזר להם,
זה
הם לא ידעו.
צדיק, אז מה ההבדל? אז איך אתה מביא לי את זה
הוא אומר לך עבר ושעה.
We don't know.
עבר זה אומר שעבר במייסים.
כמה פעמים בגמרא, we bring a question and we don't give an answer. So we brought a proof.
רגע, אז מה העניין שהבאת לי את כל הסיפור
אבל
הזה?
we pushed away the proof. We pushed away the proof, so therefore we don't have a proof. It doesn't mean you have an answer. You didn't answer the question.
Before you start,
Yeah.
1 second.
הבנת?
לא.
מה?
כי זה עבר במזיד.
הביאו לך אותו דוגמה.
אל תעשו ככה, אולי הם לא ידעו להם.
ותאכלו לבריאות בתיאבון. But don't do that next week, please.
You could understand him that way.
נראה לי ככה, אולי אני לא
No,
מבין.
the point is, when the story said asar lahen. So asar lahen could either mean Oma shezeh asor le'achol, and then it will be a proof that there is a
אמרת
knas.
שהוא אסר להם את זה
No,
בשבת הבאה.
that's two ways to look at it. Either when the Gemara brings a proof, when it brings a proof, and then it says it's not a proof, the point is not that it's vadai asar lahen leShabbat haba. It could be that. Memela, since it could be that, you don't have a proof. No, but Avanta, meaning the Gemara brings a proof, but then it pushes away the proof. It doesn't mean for sure that that's the pshat. It means you could look at it two ways. Memela, you don't have a proof. That's the point.
אבל אם השאלה הוא אסר להם או לא אסר להם?
No, we don't know. We only heard the story afterwards. ושמענו בסיפור הזה שהוא עשה להן. אז מה זה עשה להן? יכול להיות עשה להן שעשה להן לאכול היום, או שאמר להם אסור לעשות כן לשבת הבאה. ובאמת זה מותר. זו השאלה, אבל לא יודעים. ממילא, I don't know if it's a proof.
רבנו.
No.
אבל הוא אומר שהלך רבי יוסי ציפור מצא חמין של אשתו על גבי קירה, שאינה גרופה, ולא אסר להן, מפני שמצטמקים ורע להם הם. מצטמק ורע לו.
החמין.
הביצים.
לא.
החמין. וביצים מצומקות, שמבושלות היטב של אשתו על גבי קירה, ואסר אותן להן, מפני שביצה תמיד מצטמקת ויפה לה.
כן.
מה אליו? האם לא אסר ביוסי את הביצים לאותו שבת? דהיינו שאסר אותם באכילה מפני שאשתו באיסור? למד לפני שתפשישתה בשבת על קריאה שלה גופה אסור באכילה. דוחה הגמרא לא.
יאללה, let's go, חבר'ה. It's not a proof. בקיצור, it's not a proof. Now, what's the halacha? We have to look it up. עיין שם. Let's see. בית הלל אומרים אף מחזירי. Now we get into this sugya of chazara. Okay, so you took off the cholent
אם עכשיו אשתי שואלת לי מה באמת לעשות.
We have to look it up. We have to look it up. I'm sorry, I can't give you an answer. We have to look it up.
מה נעשה? אם שואל אותך, תגיד לי מה אתה...
יוחאי, we have to look it up. I agree.
מה נעשה?
We have to look it
מה
up.
אתה ממנו? רבי יוסי מחלוקת
No, we have to look
לרבי...
it up. We have to look it up, באמת.
לא, הוא שואל למישהו, אתה שואל אותך מישהו שתגיד לי, אני יכול לאכול את הביצים האלה? שמתי אותם, אני מצטער מאוד, באמת. נתנו, אבל הוא תראה לאכול או לא? מה תגיד לו, לך לגמר לרבי יוסי?
Okay, look.
מה לענות לו?
Yochai, afterwards we'll talk about it. Let's see what he says there. But anyways, let's see. Chazara, okay? Now, we talked about Shehiyah until now. Now we're going to go back to Chazara for a second. Shehiyah, what's the whole problem of Shehiyah? Shem yechateh b'gechalim. The whole issue. What's the issue of Chazara? Chazara. So you also have the issue of Shem yechateh b'gechalim, but you have another issue of Now, just to emphasize that point, let's say I have a hot plate, right? Am I allowed to put something lechatchila on the hot plate on Shabbat? Lechatchila, put something on the hot plate. Now, let's just say no. The answer is you're not allowed to, and the reason you're not allowed to is because it's mechziki mevashel. It looks like you're cooking. You put some food on a hot plate on Shabbat. Of course not. So why is chazara permitted? The reason chazara is permitted, listen to this, is because it's not mechzikim mevashel. What does it mean? It's not that you're starting a new process of bishul, but rather you're continuing the original shehiyah that began before Shabbat. Meaning before Shabbat you put the food on the stove, you could take it off and put it back on. The chazara is permitted, again, with all the appropriate conditions that are necessary, kol ha'tanayim, all the things that are necessary, because you're not starting a new process of bishul. That would be a problem of mechziki v'vashel. Rather, you're just continuing the shehiyah from what was before Shabbat, and therefore that's not a problem. But now let me ask you a very interesting question. When you take the cholent off the fire Friday night, a guy is watching, right? What's the guy assuming is your focus? Is your focus to put it back on the fire when you take it off, or is your focus to keep it off of the fire? Mistama, you want to eat that cholent tomorrow also. So therefore, when you take it off Friday night, it's logical that your intent is to put it back, and there's no issue, because you're going to put it back, and it's a hemshech of the sheiyah from before Shabbat.
Maybe there is a way how you take it out.
Well, there is, for sure. But everybody understand, the observer, somebody that's watching, bistama, you want to put it back, because you want to eat that food tomorrow also. So that's not mechsi ki mevashel. But when you take it off on Shabbat day, what's the problem? This is your seudah. So this has more of a problem that it's mechzi ki mevashel. And I may have thought, very interesting, that when you take it off Shabbat bayom during the day, you should not be allowed to put it back.
What's the difference?
Because it looks like a break from the process that you started before Shabbat, and when you put it back, it's like a new process, and you're not allowed to do a new process like that on Shabbat. You're only allowed to do chazara. You're not allowed to do a new start.
So we're talking about the ayat, so let it go if it's very hot.
Okay, that's a different story. Tanaim we're going to get to, we'll see.
Because you say...
But everybody understand that chiluk
right
between Friday night and Shabbat day. There's a chiluk. Friday night, it's clear when you're taking it off, you want to put it back because you want to eat that food tomorrow. But Shabbat bayom, you have another meal. Shabbat bayom, when you take it off, somebody watching, it looks like you're separating from the original sheiyah before Shabbat, and that's a problem. So maybe you could think, we're going to see this is not the halacha, but you could think that there's no kula of chazara that's permitted if you take it off on Shabbat. Now again, obviously, you need gufa uktuman. We're going to go through tanaim that are also required, but let's see this inside. Beit Hillel omrim af machzirim. Beit Hillel say you're also allowed to return the food to the fire again where there's gufa uktuma, etc. Fine. Amar Rav Sheshet. So Rav Sheshet says like this: the Devrei Omer machzirin. According to Beit Hillel, who says you're allowed to return the food to the fire. Lefi that shita chazara is mutar afilu b'Shabbat. Even if you take it off bayom on Shabbat day. Meaning the point is, since your focus was to return it, you're even allowed to put it back on the fire. That's the chidush. Even though you may have thought that's like a separation from the original action, and you're not allowed to put it back on the fire, says Rav Sheshet, Beit Hillel is matir, again, under the right conditions, has to be gufa ktuma, has to be kavanah to return it, etc. But if you had that kavanah, filu bayom would be mutar. And also Rabbi Yoshaya held you're even allowed to return it on Shabbat. Now let me just speak out the proof we're about to see. We're going to quote a story where Rabbi Yoshaya took something off the fire in a way that looks like he's not going to return it, meaning from outside it looked like he wouldn't return it, and yet he still returned it. So you see from this that even if you take it off in a way that looks like you might not return it, as long as you wanted to return it, you could still return it. What's the story? Rabbi Yoshaya, as Rabbi Yoshaya explained, one time, we were standing in front of Rabbi Chia Rabbah. Now he had wine, this Rabbi Chia Rabbah, and they used to mix the wine with water, specifically with hot water. Now Rabbi Chia Rabbah, on Shabbat, he was on the top story of the building, and they had the kettle of hot water on the bottom story. So the Talmidim went to the lower story, took the pot off the fire. Ve'elanu lo kumkimus. It's a kumkum. They brought him up the kettle shel chamin of hot water. Mi diyuta tachtona le diyuta alyona. From the lower story to the higher story. Umazagnu lo etakos. We mixed the hot water in the wine, which is how they used to do it. And then ve'chzarnu limkomo. We returned the hot water to the pot, what it was sitting on. Velo amar lanu davar, and this Rabbi Chia didn't say anything to us. So says the Gemara, what's the proof? Now this the Rishonim speak out. I believe the Rashba. The Rashba says like this. So what's the proof? The proof is when you remove the hot water from the pot on the lower story, somebody sees, it looks like you're not going to bring it back up and then bring it back down. That's not something that's a hemshech of the original process. It looks like you're not going to return it. So if you hold that you wouldn't be allowed to return it, it would appear that if there's an observer, somebody that's watching, and it looks like it's going to be legamri removed, you're not allowed to return it. And yet, they were allowed to return it. So what does it show you? As long as you have the right tanaim, again, gufa uktuma, kavanah lachzir, all of the things that are necessary, and by the way, it has to still be hot, It's also a very important condition. We'll get to all these conditions are very important. You're still allowed to return it. So says the Gemara, you see from this, even if you take it off Shabbat day and it looks like maybe you're not going to return it, it's still mutar to return it. Again, with all the Tanaim, that's the proof that the Gemara brings. You're allowed to return it even Shabbat by day. Now we're going to go through a series of Tanaim, conditions that are necessary for chazara. Okay?
Can you repeat just this one and understand it? To take off, the part from Shabbat, what's the connection with the story with the rabbi, with the halachot?
The connection is, when you take it off of the fire on Shabbat by day, it looks like you're not planning to return it.
Yes, because the last meal.
The same thing is, when you take the water off the fire on the lower story and you bring it up, it looks like you're disconnecting. You're not going to return it. That's a separate maaseh.
Why? What's the connection? From the bottom to...
Because you take water from here and you schlep across the street or something, to return it to the original source, that's like a restart. It's not continuing from the previous shehiyah before Shabbat, but that's starting a new process. When you do it Friday night, so anyone who's watching knows you're going to put it back. But when you take it off of the fire in the lower story or on Shabbat day, it looks like that's it. You're finished with it. So perhaps you would say that's a michsi kimivashel problem. The chidush we're saying is it's still mutar to return it. Again, with the right conditions. There's no hefdel, exactly. But again, you have to have the right conditions.
Friday night, Saturday day, live day.
Exactly. Well, there is a logical difference. So that's what we're saying. In halakha we're saying not, but yeah.
But maybe it's a different item that I do need for my own use, for the next day or for today.
Yeah.
As
long as you have the right conditions, we have to go through now. There's a lot of conditions that are necessary. One of them, like I said before, it still has to be hot, by the way. That's also a condition. So let's see. Amar Rabbi Zreika, Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rabbi Tadai. Lo shanu, you're only allowed to return it to the fire. Ela she'odan bi'ado. Okay, so number one, it has to still be in your hand. Again, what's the logic? Because if it's not in your hand anymore, you're separate from the original shehiyah, and then when you put it back on the fire, it's mechsi kimevashel. It's like a new process. That's a problem. But if you put it on the ground after removing it from the fire, asur, it will be problematic. Rabbi Ami said, Rabbi Tadai da'avad. Rabbi Tadai was paskening this way, but legarmeo da'avad. Rashi says, zayarak, legarmeo means la'atzmo. This is his dat yachid. This is his own shita. But we don't follow this shita. Because Rabbi Yochanan was cholek, and he said, even if you put it on the ground, mutar, it's permitted to return. Why? Because assuming it was still hot, and you had kavanah to return it, all of these things, it would be mutar to return.
We're talking about also chamin.
Hot
We didn't speak about tafshim.
No, the same. The same. The same. Pligi bar Dimi Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda. Now there's the same machloket Rav Dimi and Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda. But Tarvayim Mishmei Rabbi Elazar Amri, and they're both arguing what did Rabbi Elazar hold. Chadamar, one of these Amoraim held Odan biado mutar. Only if it's still in your hand it's mutar. Al gabe karka asu. If you took it off and put it on the ground it's asu. The Chadam and the other one said Inichan al gabe karka nami mutar. Even if you put it on the ground it's going to be mutar. So now we've shown there's a machloket in the Amoraim. If you put it on the ground, you're not allowed to return it, or if you put it on the ground, you're still allowed to return it. Says the Gemara another factor, and there's two Ika da Amris in Chizkiah. Amar Chizkiah, Mishmei da Abaye. Chizkiah said in the name of Abaye, this is the first Ika da Amri. Ha da Amrit odan biado mutar. This that you say, when it's still in your hand, you could return it. Lo amaran ela sheda'ato la'achzir. So now we throw in another condition. You have to have intention to also return it. So meaning like this, when I take the cholent off, it has to stay in my hand, and when I take it off, I have to have in my mind that I'm planning to return it. Two conditions to return it. But if I took it off, not intending to return it, asur, then I would not be allowed to return it. So mazomer, in order to return it, I need two tanayim in the positive. One, in my hand still. Two, my kavanah was to return it. So says the Gemara, Michlal, according to this, it would imply the al gabi karka, that if I put it on the ground, afal pisha da'ato la'achzir, even if I intended to return it, asur, it would be prohibited to return. Meaning, you need tarti letova, you need the two conditions in the positive in order to return it. But odabi ado and kavanah la'achzir. If you don't have both conditions, Lefi this version of Chizkiah, you're not allowed to return it. Ikadami, now there's another version. Amar Chizkiah mishmei Abaye. Chizkiah said the name of Abaye. The opposite, which is Hada Amir Talgabe Karka Asur, that when do you say if you put it on the ground you're not allowed to return it? Lo Amaran El Shein Da'ato Lachzir. That's only if your intention was not to return it when you took it off. Aval Da'ato Lachzir Mutar. But if your intention was to return it, even though you put it on the ground, you are allowed to return it. So let me just finish. Michlal, this would imply Shebe'odan Biado, that if you kept it in your hand, even if your intention was not to return it, mutar, it would be mutar. Let's speak that out. The second version is much more lenient, much more mekil. In order to not return it, there has to be tartila reuta, there has to be a double negative. 1, you put it on the ground. 2, your kavanah was not to return it. Mashma, that if you took it off and it's still in your hand, even if your kavanah was not to return it, you could still return it. Meaning, according to the second version, we're much more lenient. We're saying is, the only time you have to be machmir and not return it is if you have both negative conditions. You put it on the ground and kavanah was lo lachzir. But if you have one of the positive conditions, you could actually return it. So it comes out that the two versions of Chizkiah and Abaye are mikatzeh lakatzeh.
Again?
The first version is saying the allowance to return it, it's much more machmir. You're only allowed to return it if you have both positive conditions.
Not on the karka.
It's in your hand, and kavanah lachzir. The second one is much more lenient. It's saying much more lakel.
The second.
The second,
to take it off.
Exactly.
To
return it.
Not to return.
What's that?
To return
is that you're not allowed to return it, the second Ikeda Amri says, if you put it on the ground, as well as you didn't have intention to return it. But that means, even if you didn't have intention, but you kept it in your hand, you are allowed to return it. So they come out opposite versions in this Gemara. Very, very interesting. Now again, the Mefarshim add in over here, it has to be still hot. Because if it's not hot anymore, the problem is now you're creating a new bishul process. That would be problematic too. Etc. That creates the issue. That doesn't say it over here, but let's see. That we'll have to get to an halacha. Says the Gemara, by Rabbi Yirmiyah. And Rabbi Yirmiyah finishes off this sugya with a series of questions. Okay, so we made this chiluk between odan biado and al gabe karka. So Rabbi Yirmiyah asks a couple of things. Is it considered biado or al gabe karka? That's really the question. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, tela'an b'makel. What if you had it hanging on a stick, like a peg? Meaning, you took it off the fire. It's not still in your hand, but you hung it on something. So it's not on the floor, but it's not in your hand. So which one is this considered? Is it considered biado, or is it considered al gabe karka? Mahu. And ichan al gabe mita mahu. Or what if you put it on a bed? Meaning you didn't put it on the floor, you put it on a stool, you put it on something. Is that considered biado? Is it considered al gabe karka? By Ravashi asked another question. Pinan mimecham lemecham mahu. Listen to this case. You had hot water boiling on the stove. Now you could take it off and put it back on. But what did you do? You took the pot off the stove and you poured it into another pot. And now you want to know, can I put the second pot back on the stove?
Yeah.
Because the second pot has the water that was originally on the stove in it, but it's a different kli. So is that considered chazara, or is that like a new process of bishul, which is a problem?
What's the difference?
So the point is that again, is it mechzikim b'vashal or not? And the Gemara says, ma what's the halacha? Take all of these questions are left unresolved. That's the unresolution. Yeah, let's continue. I want to go a little bit ahead, Chevra. The Gemara says now that we start a new Mishnah, Be'ezat Hashem, we're going to speak about different types of ovens, okay? So in order to understand this, let's just speak out here. There's three types of ovens we're discussing. One of them we already discussed. So kira, we're going to really clarify this in the sugya. We have kira, tanur, and what's the other one called? Kupach. Very interesting. Kira, tanur, and kupach. Now kira is a double stove. Draw a picture here. Very beautiful, okay. A double stove. It's like a rectangular shaped double stove. The heat in this is not so intense. It doesn't get so strong. A tanur is a trapezoidal shaped thing like this. And the heat in this is very strong. Okay, the heat is very strong. And because of that, we actually learned earlier, gufa uktuma doesn't even help you. The heat is so intense that the gufa uktuma doesn't actually help. We learned that, Rashi pointed that out.
So where's the fuel?
There's fuel inside, but even if you would scrape it out or cool it down, apparently it's such a strong heat.
It will preserve the heat.
It preserves the heat. Even we're going to see, even in a case where you use kash v'gvava, it's interesting. We're going to see Tiferet Yisrael says, very interesting, is that heat is so strong it creates sparks, and there's still a chashash of shem yechateh b'gechalim because of the strength of the heat. Even in those things which we said, even in those things that we said by the kira that you're mutar, you don't need it gufa uktuma. And then the final one is called the kupach. Kupach is a square like a stovetop, like the kira, but it's only half. It's one. It's one. It's half. It's not a double stove. It's a regular stove. Okay. Now, this we're going to see is something between kira and tanur.
In terms of the temperature.
In terms of the heat, exactly. Mm-hmm. So therefore, the halacha is going to be somewhere in the middle between kira and tanur. That's what we're going to see in this Mishnah. So let's see this inside. Let's go. It says the Mishnah, tanur sheisiku bekash uvigvava. If you have a tanur, okay, so you have an oven which gets extremely hot. And as the Tiferet Yisrael says, Bekashu v'gvava, even though you use the straw and stubble, which usually burns up, the heat of this tanur makes it that it becomes like sparks, and it becomes so hot that there's still a chashash and an isu. Lo yitain, you're not allowed to put something on it. Now, lo yitain, here, it depends how you learned the prior Mishnah, how you learn lo yitain here. According to Chananya, the previous Mishnah, lo yitain means lo yachzir. According to the Chachamim, the previous Mishnah, lo yitain meant lo yishhe. So they'll learn the same pshat in this Mishnah, whatever the isur is. So you're not allowed to place the food in this tanur, even if it was heated with just kash and gvava, ben mitocho ben me'al gabav. You're not allowed to put the food, again, for shehiyah or chazara, depending on the shita, both inside of it, as well as on top of it. You're not allowed to. So the heat of this oven is so intense that you're not allowed to. And Rashi says, and we learned earlier, even with gufa uktuma doesn't help you. The tanur, apparently the heat is so intense that you're not allowed, if it's on, I guess if it's off, then there's no problem. But if it's on, means the heat was there, you're not allowed to put food in it or on top of it. Kupach, however, if it's that's the tanur, the trapezoidal shaped hotter oven.
In between.
Kupach is something in between, which is it's like half of a kira. So it's hot, but not as much as tanur. Sheisiku bekashu v'gvava. So now there's a chiluk like this. If it was heated up with kashu v'gvava, how is it kirayim? So it's like kirayim. Now kirayim, we said, if you have kashu v'gvava, you could do shiyah or chazara. That's actually allowed.
Turn to coals.
Either because again it doesn't get so hot, or because it doesn't turn into coals. Exactly. Begefet uveitzim, but if it's heated up with gefet and eitzim, again gefet was the psolet of the shum shemin, of the sesame, of the olives, and it's mosif hevel, it gets very hot. Uveitzim, or with wood, or it turns into coals. Hareu ketanur.
So this is
that's like a tanur. Now what does it mean like a tanur? It's asur. Seemingly it's asur. So meaning like this, if you use the other items of
tanur for what?
Kash
for chazara, to put on top, to put aside.
It's like kira.
Kash v'gvava, it's like kira, it's mutar. Again, depending on the shita, either chazara or shehiyah, however you go in the shitot.
Okay.
But if you use gefet or eitzim, so it's like tanur and that's asur. Now the Gemara is going to try to figure out, what are we talking about here? Is this where this kupach had gufa uktuma or did not have gufa uktuma? Because that's not clear in the Mishnah.
If you say it's tanur,
I already said, what? Excellent. That would be the simple pshat. If you say tanur cannot have gufa uktuma, hareu kitanur. Beautiful. So let's see. There's going to be two ways to learn the Mishnah. Let's see. Says the Gemara, tanur sheisiku. So Savar Rav Yosef lemeimar. Rav Yosef wanted to say the following. What did the Mishnah say? It said, when it comes to this tanur sheisiku bekashu v'gvava, we said gufa uktuma doesn't help you, and we said lo yitain ben mitocho ben me'al gabav. So he's medayek like this. What does the Mishnah say? You can't put food, whether it's shiyah or chazara, mitocho or al gabav. What about samuchlo?
We said it's mutar.
Well, we said it's mutar for kira, but a tanur is much more hot. But says Rav Yosef, the Mishnah specifically says asur by tanur mitocho ve'al gabav. Mashma
samuchlo mutar.
Samuchlo mutar. It's a good proof in the words of the Mishnah. Let's read that inside. So he says like this, Savar of Yosef lemeimar tocho mamash. It means inside of it. Al gabav mamash. That it means on top of it. But next to it, shapir dami, that would be acceptable. So says Rav Yosef, it's mashma from here, that when it comes to samuch letano, you're actually allowed to put it. It's like a kira in that way, actually. So the Gemara says, Abai asked the kasha on Rav Yosef, on his Rebbe, from the Mishnah. Now let's go through this, going to be a few steps. What does the end of the Mishnah say? It says like this, kupach she'esikuhu bekash uvigvava. The kupach, the single stove that was heated up with kash uvigvava, hareo kikirayim. So he says like kirayim, it's mutar, okay? Begefet uveitzim. But if it was heated with the things that are mosif hevel, they're hotter, they make coals, hareo kitanur. Now, that means if the kupach was heated with gefet or eitzim, it's like a tanur. And it was vasu. Vasu. So says Abai like this. Vasu. Mashma ha kikira, but akira in the same situation, shari, would be mutar. Now what does it mean? Let's stop for a second. Whatever the case of the seifa is of this kupach, it's saying it's like a tanur, and since it's like a tanur, it's asur. Sheyah, chazara, however you learn, it's asur. Now whatever that case...
Again. Yeah.
The Mishnah says, kupach, that is a kupach, if it was heated with gefet and eitzim,
it's like tanur.
It's like a tanur and it's asur. Asur. Okay? Now, we're not sure what the case is exactly. We're going to go through a few options, try to figure it out. Right? We're going to figure out exactly what is their gufa uktuma, and we're also trying to figure out is where are you putting the food? Is it on top or is it next to it? But whatever the case is of asur, it's mashma that the kirayim in the same case would be mutar. That's why it's saying it's like a tanur and it's asur. Mashma that kirayim in the same case would be mutar.
Okay.
So the Gemara says, "B'maya skinan." What is the case of this kupach that we're saying it's like a tanur and it's asur? Ilem al gabav. If it's talking about you're putting the food on top of it over mai. So he says, but wait a second. Okay, you're putting the food on top of it. But what is the case? Ilem akisha eno gavu fikatum. If it's where there's no gufa uktuma. There's no gufa uktuma. So Ella, the Gemara says, but that's not true. Because if there's no gufa uktuma, elakira ki ena gufa uktuma al gabav mishari, even gufa uktuma, even by a kira, if there's no gufa uktuma, it's not permitted to put on top of it. So, says the Gemara, it can't be that the case is where you're putting the food on top without gufa uktuma, says Abaye, because if there wasn't gufa uktuma, you don't say it's like a tanur and it's asur, because even a kira without gufa uktuma al gabav would be asur. Elalav, so it must be lismoch. Says Abaye, what must be the case of kupach? You're not putting the food on top, you're putting the food next to the kupach. And what it's saying in the Mishnah then is, Harehu kitanur v'asur.
Lama.
1 second, v'asur. So what does that tell you? That even lismoch, letanur, is asur. V'katani harehu kitanur v'asur. By the way, we learned this already, because by akira, what's the halacha? Lismoch is mutar. So now you made a chiluk. That makes sense. That's why it's saying hareu kitanur v'asur. Let's speak it out. Let's speak it. So it comes out, says Abaye, from the end of the Mishnah, which he understands. Abaye understands it can't be where there's gufa uktuma. He understands without gufa uktuma, because if there was gufa uktuma, it's not even a question.
But lismoch we said in the air.
Exactly. So says Abaye to Rav Yosef, you're saying the fact that in the Reisha it says tanur al gabav ubitocho is asur, it's mashma lesmoch is mutar. I'll show you from the Seifa it's not true. How do I know that? Because in the Seifa it says kupach. When it comes to this, something in the middle type of oven, it says if you heat it up with gefet and eitzim, what's the halacha? It's like a tanur v'asur. Mashma, if it was like kirayim, it would be mutar. Now what's the distinction between kirayim and tanur? So it says it can't be time you're putting it on top because and then there's no gufa uktuma, because of course even kirayim would be asur to put on top without gufa uktuma. Must be without gufa uktuma and you're putting it next to it. Kirayim is mutar, tanur is asur. Haraya against Rav Yosef that when it comes to a tanur, the smoch is mutar. No. Levanta.
So that nafkamina?
It's a proof. So Amar Ravada Barahava says, no, you're wrong. Abaye, you're not understanding the Mishnah properly. Ravada Barahava says, Acha bekupach garu v'katum. We're talking about a kupach that was scraped out or was cooled down. V'tanur gufa uktuma skinan. And similarly, we're saying it's like an oven that was gufa uktuma. Now, what does it mean? Hareu ki tanur. We're saying like this. It's like a tanur. De'af al gav de garuf katum. That even though it's scraped out, as we said before, al gabav asur, on top of it is asur. We're not talking about the smoch. The smoch might be asur too. That's not the discussion. The smoch would be mutar, like Rav Yosef said. That's not the discussion. What we're saying over here is that the case of kupach is where you did gufa uktuma. Hareu tanur means it doesn't help you, just like a tanur. Gufa uktuma doesn't help you, so you can't put it on top. Te'i kira, as opposed to a kira, ki gufa uktuma, shapir dami. That when it comes to gufa uktuma v'kira, it is mutar. So therefore, that's what the Mishnah means to say it's not talking about this smoch. So what comes out is, there's two ways to learn this part of the Mishnah. Abaye's learning pshat in the Mishnah is that when it comes to kupach, it's like tanur. But what does it mean it's like tanur? Is that lismoch, that's how Abaye is learning. Also lismoch, without gufa uktuma, lismoch is asur. That's what Abaye is learning. Rav Yosef, as explained by Rav Ada Bar Ahava, he's saying that's not the pshat. The pshat is where you did gufa uktuma in the kupach. The Mishnah is telling you the gufa uktuma doesn't help you, just like it doesn't help you when it comes to tanur. But it doesn't talk about the smoke because the smoke is mutar.
But Abaye didn't even mention gufa uktuma.
Correct. He held that
Abaye just basically compared the tanur and the kupach.
Exactly.
He put them equally.
He says without gufa uktuma. Exactly. Let's. There's a few more lines here. We can stop here.
We push a lot of information.
Yeah? Stop here? Because the Braita just supports Abaye. All right, we'll stop here. Fine. Pick up tomorrow with Tanya. B'ezat Hashem. All right. Stopping towards the bottom. B'ezat Hashem. Sheva? Tzak Baruch. Yom Tov.
ברוך תהיה רבה, חזק וברוך.
Yeah.